Hello and welcome. Well, voters in Minneapolis have some big decisions to make in the next week. We're taping this on October 18th of 2021, and next week on November 2nd, or a week and a half, we're going to be voting on some big questions in our city here in Minneapolis. And I think we're being watched by people from all over the world. The main question that we're focusing on tonight, and the main issue, is regarding the future of our police department. And I guess the way to simply state the decision is, do we replace the Minneapolis Police Department with Department of Public Safety? And I'm going to let our guest talk about what that entails, but it's a big, big decision. We're going to have JaNaé Bates on with me first. JaNaé is the Communications Director for Yes for Minneapolis. You've been hearing about that group. She is also a Communications Director in her regular job, which is with the Isaiah nonprofit organization. She's a fascinating person. She's a Fulbright scholar, and she is a United Church of Christ minister. So she's had a busy and interesting life. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Such a big topic, and we're going to just have you on for 15 minutes, as you know, and then we're going to have Don Samuels on talking about the other side of the issue, and he's saying, no, we don't want to do this. So we're going to squeeze as much as we can into each half of the half hour here. I'd love to have you start and read, if you would, JaNaé, the amendment as it's written that we'll be voting on.
Absolutely.
So you can all hear it again.
My pleasure. Shall the Minneapolis City Charter be amended to remove the police department and replace it with the Department of Public Safety that employs a comprehensive public health approach to the delivery of functions by the Department of Public Safety, with those specific functions to be determined by the mayor and city council by ordinance, which will not be subject to exclusive mayoral power over its establishment, maintenance, and command, and which could include licensed peace officers, police officers in parentheses, if necessary, to fulfill its responsibilities for public safety, with the general nature of the amendments briefly indicated in the explanatory note below, which is made part of the ballot.
And it's a bit complicated to hear it, but I think once people really study it, they won't feel it's as complicated. Yeah. But you're getting a lot of feedback, aren't you, saying, this is complicated?
You know, I think we tend to find that a lot with ballot questions in general. It's usually a big piece of policy that you have to really kind of whittle down to a simple sentence.
Mm-hmm. I didn't type up or give you the explanatory note that follows that you'll see when you vote, for those of you who are Minneapolis folks. And that really says a couple things that are, I think, pretty controversial. One is that the police department and the chief would be removed from the city charter. And does that mean, JaNaé, that our chief, Arredondo, will definitely be out of a job if the
absolutely not.
Ballot passes?
Yeah.
Not true.
That is not true. Actually, it just means that the chief's position, as well as the funding that is associated with policing, that process gets moved outside of the city charter into an ordinance process, which in the entire state of Minnesota, that's how all the other cities of the state operate. So Minneapolis is an anomaly in that it had that information in the city's constitution.
Thinking of Minneapolis as an anomaly, though, isn't it true that we are one of the only big cities of our size or larger that are even considering this kind of a move to a public safety kind of focus?
No, actually, many cities across the country are looking at different ways to actually start to give real reforms
But big
to their
ones,
police
like
department. Oh, absolutely.
Big ones like us?
Absolutely. We've seen this happen most certainly in Seattle. We've seen it happen in Denver, Colorado. We've seen New York. We've seen Austin, Texas. Many cities are really starting to grapple with what it means to have a police department that is accountable to the people that they protect and serve. And they want to ensure that those officers and that the people in the city have all the resources that they need to stay safe.
Well, are you saying that Seattle and New York don't have police departments?
No, what I'm saying is, and to be clear, the city of Minneapolis, for the foreseeable future, would have a police department as well. The city charter change does not get rid of the department. It merely takes it out of the city charter and it has it exist by ordinance, which is the way, again, that most cities, even in the state of Minnesota, operate. And so there is an ordinance already in place, and it has been for many decades in Minneapolis, that establishes the police department. And it'll exist, and it'll continue to exist for as long as necessary as the Department of Public Safety gets to become fully comprehensive and it gets to be integrated with police officers.
My assumption, just from what I've read, is that we have only 30 days, though, if this passes, to deal with this question.
Yeah, I think that's another misconception. What we have in 30 days is that the mayor and the city council will get to nominate and appoint an interim department commissioner. So that will happen in the first 30 days. But moving forward, then you get to actually have that data-driven process, the community engagement process, where you look at things like 911 calls. You know, Minneapolis police officers have said that they get called into way too many things that they aren't qualified for, and that the majority of calls to 911 actually aren't law enforcement involved. So you get to have a process where you can actually make sure that you have the right professionals for the occasion, mental health professionals, homeless prevention, that kind of thing. And during that process, again, the ordinance that establishes the police department will continue to exist, which means that Minneapolis police will still have patrol and response just as folks have known them to, and that will always continue, actually, because in the state of Minnesota, there is a state statute that mandates that police officers respond to a whole series of things.
But the funding, according to the explanatory note, the funding, you won't hold a minimum amount of money for funding the police department. Am I correct on that?
Right, and that's more associated with the staffing. So right now, because Minneapolis is the anomaly in the state where the staffing levels and the funding are embedded into the city's constitution, right? And this was something that was set in place in 1961.
Right.
So that was many years ago, as you know. And the reality is that the city has changed drastically over that time. I mean, we've had an entire civil rights era, and arguably we're in a second era of that. And so this update, this charter amendment change, is really to make it possible to make sure that the staffing levels and the budget meet the needs of the city in 2021, not just 1961.
So the budget could go up.
It could, absolutely.
Right now, we only have, 300 policemen on the force.
I think it's a little over that, but it's definitely under the number of the city charter. And that is not because they haven't gotten the funding. They actually are fully funded for the level of police within the department. However, we do know that many officers have left the force, have claimed PTSD and early retirement. And so what we've seen is that even though the department is fully funded to have the number of officers that the city charter requires, that the Minneapolis Police Department has a hard time filling those positions, training those people, and getting them on the street. And so what we're actually recommending is that in this process that we actually make sure that the police officers, especially those who left because of PTSD, because of saying that they're being stretched too thin, being asked to do things that they shouldn't be doing, why don't we as a city, why doesn't the city of Minneapolis finally have the qualified professionals that are needed to fill those roles that make sense for them?
But who decides, JaNaé, let's say a call comes into 911 and someone is frantic at the other end. Who decides, is it the 911 operator, who to send to that home, to that crisis?
Yeah. Well, there are people who actually nationwide have been qualified and trained to know the right kind of response for those issues. One really great program that we're seeing work is in Denver, Colorado. They have the STAR program, right? And they just piloted it for 6 months, and they're now trying to get it to scale. And the reality is that they were able to divert a little under 800 calls that were really about substance abuse issues, homeless outreach, mental health crisis. And in all of those calls, every single one of them, they found that there were 0 arrests and there was 0 need for a co-response even. So a police officer didn't need to be deployed. This is a great opportunity to be able to get things like that to scale.
So often, though, there is a combination of factors going into a crisis, and might be partly mental health, but there might also be gun wielding, people involved. And as a social worker myself, I think I would be very anxious about going out on a call that the 911 operator had to quickly ascertain would be my kind of call.
Well, certainly this would move at the pace of the city, and the whole purpose and point of it is for people to be safe. And so if there was an inclination that it didn't make sense for someone, a social worker, for example, or a mental health practitioner to go alone, they wouldn't. And most certainly in what we're seeing across the nation with these programs that do work is that police would be deployed when it makes sense, and sometimes that's a co-response.
We only have 1 minute left, JaNaé.
Oh, no.
I have one big question that I want to ask before we are all out of time. I read that Yes for Minneapolis has received, I believe, $1.4 million. I'm wondering how much of that is from outstate, percentage-wise, and how much is local?
Yeah, well, we have gotten some pretty big checks from some folks who are from outside of the state. We also got a bunch of little donations from people outside the state as well. But we have thousands of donations from people right here in Minneapolis and in Minnesota. The reality is that this campaign is grassroots. It's a bunch of organizations, 70 plus organizations. It's a bunch of communities and small businesses, but it's also really led by Black and brown people. And we know that these communities have had their resources extracted and exploited for a long time. And so when people witnessed across the globe the murder of George Floyd, they wanted to be able to put their money where their values are. And so we did see, most certainly, people say that I'm willing to help to ensure that the people of Minneapolis get to do the things that they need, which is how we got 22,000 people in Minneapolis to sign the petition to get this on the ballot.
If you would like to learn more about this, and I'm sorry it's gone so fast, www.yes4, using the number 4, spell out Minneapolis.org. Thank you, JaNaé.
Thank you.
Maybe we can have you come back after the election.
Yes, this was great. Thank you.
I'll be back with Don Samuels, who will talk about the other side of the question. We'll be right back. I am back now with Don Samuels. A lot of you know Don. He was a former Minneapolis Councilman for how many years?
11.
11,
Yes.
Wow, okay. Experienced councilman. And he's now working with a wonderful organization, a nonprofit called Micro Grants. He's the CEO, and you've been with this nonprofit for quite a while, too.
6 years.
Yes, and we all know Joe Salvaggio or know of him.
Yeah.
And it's his baby
Yes.
originally, right?
Yes.
Well, you have been very much the spokesman for what I guess I just call the no vote for this ballot.
Yes.
And I want to hear some about what led you to that. But just an opening question, Don, I'm wondering if you think that by voting no, if that would prevail, are we going to say to the country and to the world, really, the status quo is okay in Minneapolis. We're not going to do much to change things.
No,
Is that
not
a
at all.
danger?
Not at all. In fact, Sandra and I and a young man who lived with us who had to move out of the neighborhood this summer because he wasn't safe, a young African-American man.
I've read about him.
We were all on the march to the 3rd Precinct the night it was burned. We had picket signs, and we were equally concerned about the status quo and determined that it must change. It was a frightening level of radicalism that we perceived, and insensitivity to the impact of the rhetoric and the decisions on our community, especially in North Minneapolis, and on the police department, morale, etc. Just the violence, the horrible violence in our community that resulted from some of the decisions that were being made and proposed, that we decided, no, this was actually going to put us in jeopardy and we were going too far. But we still are dedicated to the transformation and the changes that are necessary to keep us, to have a respectful police department.
And yet, I've been poring over newspaper articles and blogs and trying to really immerse myself in this complex topic. I haven't seen a lot of articles saying what the no side will do if the vote goes no. Can you give me a couple?
Yeah, well, part of the reason is that the no side is sort of responding to the yes side.
Right, that is.
Because the yes side is the motion or on the ballot. That's the language that's on the ballot. We have to be talking to those issues rather than to the actual reforms. But we want the police to, the chief, we want to keep our chief, Arredondo.
So you like?
Absolutely. He's the first African American. He's a local boy. He grew up in the city. He is the first African American. St. Paul has had 4 African Americans since 1992, I believe, and that has transformed the police department's relationship with the community. We have not done that, and by the way, the mayor of St. Paul is a child of one of those early police officers.
Really?
When the
Carter?
courts, when the courts decided that mandated that they needed to integrate, which Minneapolis never got that advantage, and so you can see that a police officer's son becomes a chief. It's a whole different kind of relationship with the community, and I taught the mayor's son in Sunday school, adult class, so I know that family well. I know the Pilgrim Baptist Church in St. Paul well. I understand the relationship with the community, with the black community and the police, and the community at large is much better than it is in Minneapolis. And so there is progress to be made, and we can have we want to keep our chief. We want to get rid of the chokeholds and the kicking and the punching. We want to get the arbitration rules changed so that when the chief fires someone, he doesn't have to rehire them because they've been bargained to do that, which then reverses the authority of the chief, compromises it, and makes him second guess when he has to discipline or fire someone, because there's a 50% chance they will be rehired or the discipline will be overturned 50% of the time. So there are many things to do that are currently compromising the transformation, and many of those this change will not impact.
I read that in a 4-year period, I think it was 2013 to 17, the dates aren't so important, but only 2.7% of police who were accused of doing things that were violent in terms of the way they handled suspects, et cetera. Only 2% were reprimanded or, had to leave. And I thought, that is a horrible percentage.
Horrible percentage.
I mean, our police department, I don't know if we have more what they call bad apples than other cities, but aren't you afraid in a way that without reform, that the police department changes are going to be harder to make?
Well, yeah, without reform, not without the ballot question or the.
So I'm equating.
No, we can achieve those things because I tell you what, this is the first time that the immorality that is in the police department has been put on blast for the whole world to see, not just the citizens of Minneapolis or St. Paul or the state of Minnesota or the United States of America, but the whole world. And the police union knows it, is already meeting with African American young people, men, on a weekly basis, is already trying to stave off, just like you would say, before the law changes, let me change my ways so that it will be made easier on me. Yeah, that's what the union is doing now. The union understands that the world is watching and watching the details of the contract and how it will be likely to affect things in the future. And with the chief we have now, who filed a lawsuit against the city on racial grounds.
I remember
Yes.
reading that.
So did his predecessor on sexual grounds. And so these chiefs have wanted to change things. And now we're going to come behind them as the world behind them and say, we want these things changed.
So how, though, Don, will these changes occur if we keep the same system? Where will the push for the change?
Yeah, we are keeping the same system. Actually, if we have the charter change, we're keeping the same system. We're going to have law enforcement officers. We're going to have the police union. It's the same contract. They can't change the arbitration rules. What they're actually doing, though, is they're going to get rid of this chief, get rid of the police department as we know it, give the police, the law enforcement 15 bosses, and defund the police.
They say they're not going to have 15 bosses. So I was looking at their sort of work design staffing, and it looked to me that there would be a commissioner that would be in charge under that person, the chief of police and the council.
Right. No, the council would be over the commissioner. Yes.
Okay.
The council would
Okay,
be
I've
over the
gotta
commissioner,
relook
council
at
and the
that.
mayor.
Okay.
And this is one of the things, this council wanted more control of the police.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so this design does that. And the things you're reading, let me be clear about this. The things you're reading about what the future looks like, the only thing that the future looks like is what's in that paragraph. Everything else is hypothesis being created by the last person you spoke to or the last person you speak to. Anything beyond that paragraph is up to the next council to create. And we are not, and to create from scratch. We have no idea what they're going to do. This is so dangerous.
Well, I think the public is, very ambivalent, very unsure really what to do. In terms of the people I talk to anyway, people are confused and scared, and I think everybody wants to feel more safe. I mean, there's no disagreement about that, right?
Yeah. But there is a difference between the people in, say, communities like North Minneapolis or the Phillips neighborhood, where crime has risen to levels of unprecedented, 75 people killed, 85% of those African Americans, close to 600 people shot, many of them maimed, 85% of those African Americans. So the African American community, 75% of African Americans don't want less police.
So people on the north side are really thinking like you are.
Right, people who
In
are
general,
actually
in general.
unsafe.
Right.
Meaning that
That's true.
they're dying, they're getting shot, they're hearing gunshots every night. Those people, it's not just the African American. Northsiders, they don't want to do this.
So
But people
it
who are
does
safe,
break.
people who are safe, who have a conscience, who want the world to be safer, are thinking safety from the police. We're thinking just safety to live.
Right, right. I understand that, Don. And you're in the thick of things and speak from, experience on a daily basis, don't you?
Yes.
I know you.
My
You've
neighbors,
written about that a lot.
Just tonight, my wife went over to a neighbor's house. She's selling her house and moving, and this is like our fourth neighbor, 2 houses down, because of the violence that she experienced just yesterday.
Oh, I know it's horrible. We are out of time. I can't believe it. I want to have you, though, tell us if people want to know more about the no vote position, where's the best place to go to get that?
Yeah, they can go to all of Minneapolis.
All of
Website,
Minneapolis.
or they can go to Operation Safety Now.
Okay, and both of those are websites.
Yes.
And is Minneapolis spelled out? Do you know? We can try it both ways.
Try it both ways.
Well, thank you very much for coming down. It's gone way too fast. Perhaps after the election, I'll have you back and we can go into more depth about North Side issues and strategies to get things improved. So
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Be here.
Thank you for being with us. It's kind of been a whirlwind, hasn't it? But I hope you've gleaned some insights and had a chance to have some of your questions answered. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.